At some point, a lot of us look back at our lives and think, why didn't I take better care of myself? Why did I stay so long? Why didn't I rest sooner? Why did I ignore the signals my body was screaming at me? And here's the thing I want to say right up front. Ignoring your needs isn't a moral failure. It's survival. Hey, I'm Dr. Regina, Ph.D., and this is Divergent Paths, the podcast where we talk about what late diagnosed folks actually experience and how to work with your brain instead of fighting against it. I also have a weekly newsletter, Nerd Notes, where I share more insights and tools. The link to sign up is in the show notes. This episode is about self-neglect, not as a character flaw, but as a learned survival response, and about self-forgiveness, especially for late diagnosed, high capacity, over-functioning humans, which is probably most of us. I do want to preface this episode by saying I am well aware that this is probably going to be a tender topic. But if you've been listening to the show for any length of time, you already know that I do not shy away from topics that are tender and difficult. And this one, just writing the notes up for it, gave me a whole bunch of feels. So let's talk about what self-neglect looks like. We often hear about self-neglect in big things, like where somebody missed some major health concern that was going on because they hadn't gone to their yearly doctor's appointment, or they had missed a test that would have indicated something bad that's happened to them physically. So we think about self-neglect often as being dramatic or very obvious, but it doesn't often look like that. From the outside, self-neglect looks functional. It looks like you're adapting to your life to do the things you need to do. So skipping meals is something that you can do when you're self-neglecting because you have not made time to eat. And you'll say, I don't have time for lunch. Ignoring your pain, ignoring your exhaustion, ignoring the fact that you're in emotional distress or have high emotions that you need to deal with. Staying in systems that require constant self-abandonment and masking, being in places that do not support your genuine and authentic self. And probably most painfully, treating rest and joy and care as optional or earned, as things that you have to do enough to be able to gift to yourself, instead of looking at them as things that are necessary to you. So self-neglect is very common for people who are late diagnosed with neurodivergence. Caretakers, leaders, people who are the reliable one, the person that everybody's wanting and needing help from, people who have been praised for resilience or grit or being low maintenance, because all of that ends up being coded language for not expressing or honoring your own needs. So self-neglect very often starts as a coping strategy, not as something you've chosen, but just something that you've started to do or you've done because you're masking, because you have so many things you need to do, because you have so many people relying on you. It just becomes a coping strategy for dealing with life. Why do we learn to ignore ourselves? Where does this come from? One of the most beautiful things about neurodivergent minds is how adaptable we are. We are able to do things on the fly. We're able to come up with solutions quickly. We're able to go with the flow and to move in and out of energy very easily. And that capacity, that capability, that ability of being adaptable leads to ignoring your needs. You can do so much, so you don't need a lot of help. You don't need a lot of assistance. And often you don't need a lot of support. You may want all of those things, but you don't often need them. In addition to that, we're pretty much trained from very young age to power through our discomfort, to not acknowledge when things are hard or they hurt or they are difficult. And that leads to not recognizing what your needs are. These environments often ask you to shrink what you do need, to delay your care indefinitely, to just keep putting off that doctor's appointment that you need to go to, and to normalize the sense of dysregulation, that it's normal to be dysregulated emotionally and physically. And this isn't really about a lack of self-awareness. Like we often know what we need, but we're not given the space to be able to embrace those needs. We need help sometimes, accepting help. You didn't neglect yourself instead of surviving. You neglected yourself in order to survive. And this is a really important point, and something I really want to kind of drive home here is that learning to self-abandon is a means of survival, especially when you're late diagnosed, and especially if you're listening to this and you were, I don't know, like me, and, basically 50 when you found out that you had ADHD or autism or any of the other forms of neurodivergence. Recognizing that you needed this to get to that point in your life is imperative. I didn't notice how badly I was dysregulated and burnt out until I stopped teaching. Once I stepped back from what was a 7-day-a-week schedule where I was constantly in demand and constantly answering emails and grading papers and often teaching online, actively teaching every day of the week. Until I stepped away from that and started to see what it was like to actually have a weekend. I used to spend, when I started taking weekends off, when I finally got a job, when I didn't have to be on all the time, when I first started taking weekends off, I would panic on Sunday night, like cold, hard panic on Sunday night, because I was so afraid that somebody would have emailed work, I would have, somebody would have said something would have happened, and I was going to be in trouble on Monday morning because I had been on every day for so long, for years, for 20 years that I taught. I was always checking my email to make sure to be there for my students. So learning that there wasn't any danger and I wasn't going to get fired was a hard lesson to come by. In terms of understanding self-forgiveness and why it's so difficult for us to embrace, we tend to judge our past selves on our current knowledge and on what we've learned in the present. We forget often that we didn't have a lot of that information at the time we were making the decisions. We shame ourselves, thinking that we're holding ourselves accountable. So if you ever look back and say, I should have known better, or I let myself down, all of that is shame, and we do not need to shame ourselves. Self-forgiveness isn't about saying it didn't matter. It's about saying I did the best with the tools I had at the time. We're not erasing the harm that we did. We're releasing the punishment and releasing this idea that we need to look down on or hurt our past selves in any way. That's not what this is about. You want to release your desire to punish your past selves for not behaving as well as you can behave now. So I struggle a lot with this. Not just because I have a need for perfectionism that comes very much from being high masking for so long, but because I have always been very capable and I've always been able to do a lot. And so I look back on my past selves a lot of times with how could you have not seen this and how could you have not known? And I am working really hard to learn how to forgive myself for something that was completely out of my control and be instead thankful that I was able to learn about my neurodivergent brain when I was, because it's better to at least know now than it would have been to live the rest of my life and not know. So when we want to learn how to practice self-forgiveness, this is one of the things that's really helpful to do, is to try talking to a past self. Like you would somebody that you love, and that's somebody that you want to be gentle and kind to. You were tired, you didn't have support, you didn't know to do different. You did the best you could, and you were just trying to survive. These are so important. This is so important to being able to forgive yourself for everything. Try to replace any kind of narrative that goes, why didn't I do better, do more? Why didn't I stop? Why didn't I rest? Why didn't I make that doctor's appointment when I was supposed to make that doctor's appointment? Why didn't I take the car in for the oil change when I needed to take the car in for the oil change before it, had this bigger problem happen because I didn't get the oil changed? And by the way, I currently need to take my car in for an oil change. That's why that story is hitting right now. And instead of saying, why didn't I, think more about, what made the choice I was making the best option at the time. Why was that the best that I could do in that time? And think about the other things that were going on. Notice where you punish yourself by withholding care, and punish yourself by not prioritizing rest when you need it. Those are hitching points, and those are places where you can lean into and look at what you can change. This is often a theme in the coaching that I do and that I talk to my clients about. Why are you holding yourself responsible for, this choice? How can you make space in your life? How can I help you make space in your life for the kind of care you really need? Self-forgiveness can often look like accommodations. It can look like building a life with systems that accommodate who you are. It can be scaling back on your social circle. It can be making a life that's a little bit more manageable physically. Maybe sometimes it's moving into a smaller house. If you have a big house and your house is overwhelming, sometimes that is something that is part of self-forgiveness. It is resting without saying why you deserve to rest, without telling yourself, I deserve a potato day, or I deserve to watch my favorite show because I need to rest. Rest is productive. You do not need to justify it. Lowering your expectations of yourself and what you can do without shaming yourself. Say that one again. This is a really important way to self-forgive. Lowering your expectations, whatever those expectations are, without shame, without telling yourself you're less than or not good enough or not a good person because you are pulling in so that you can live a life that doesn't burn you out or doesn't push you past a point where you can't get the rest and comfort and support that you need. So, doing all of that without shame, removing shame from it. It's a hard thing to realize that you've been so hard on yourself for your life, and that you've held yourself to a standard that was probably higher than anybody else around you was holding yourself to. But when you're late diagnosed and you're not sure how you're supposed to be, navigating the world, this is one of the things that really comes through and is really a constant theme, that forgiving yourself for that. To wrap this up, it's okay that you used self-neglect as a survival mechanism. That's totally okay. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean you did something bad at all. And it's okay that you struggle with forgiving yourself. You're not failing at anything, because these are things that have been difficult for you to understand. This is not a finish line. This is not a game you need to win. This is a practice you need to implement so that you can have a healthier, happier, joy-filled life. Think about what it would sound like to thank your past self instead of judging them.